First of all, welcome to How Publishers Increase Discoverability and Engagement with a Headless CMS, a webinar hosted by GraphCMS and AE Studio. I first want to thank everyone who is able to attend this today, as well as our panelists. They've been working really hard to put this webinar together, and we're really excited to hear what they have to say on the topic. Just a quick overview, this will be about 45 minutes long with about 35 minutes of presentation and then a 10-minute question and answer period at the end. And don't worry, if you want to share this afterwards, we'll also send around a recording of the presentation after the fact. So then, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Emily Nielsen, and I'm on the sales and marketing team here at GraphCMS. And I'll be moderating the webinar today. So I'd also like to introduce our three speakers, Jesse, Melanie, and Bruno. And if you guys want to just go ahead and say something really quickly about yourselves, I'll start with you, Jesse.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jesse, and I'm a developer advocate here at GraphCMS. And I will be interviewing AE Studio today about the project that they have done.
Hey, I'm Melanie. I'm a Fullstack developer and head of technology at AE Studio, a design, development, and data science studio in Venice, California, where I work with clients from early stage startups to enterprise companies to help build and deliver technology products.
I'm Bruno. I'm a full-stack developer at AE Studio, and I have been working with C# and JavaScript for a really long time. And I'm working right now in the BioCentury project, which is a really cool project with these technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. Just a quick overview of our agenda for the webinar. We're going to go first dive into the case study overview, identify some of the needs that were necessary for the case study in the first place, talk about the implementation of the project and then the outcomes. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have a little bit of time for some question and answer. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in either the chat or the question and A section down at the bottom of your screen. All right, I will hand it off to Jesse to get started.
All right, thanks, Emily. And hello, Melanie. Hello, Bruno. I hope you guys are having a nice early morning there in the West Coast. We're coming in from Germany. Is everything looking nice and sunny over there today?
Yeah, it's pretty good. So how's it like? What's it like in Germany?
It's not bad, actually. Spring seems to be here, so
nice.
Pretty excited about that. So I just wanted to kind of first of all wanted to give a bit of a backstory about what actually occurred here. So what was the project that you guys did with BioCentury? How did it get started? Give me a little bit of backstory about what actually kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah, so I think BioCentury was looking for a headless CMS they wanted to kind of revamp the UI, so they were looking for something that was pretty flexible. And the previous Drupal system didn't offer as much flexibility. And then they were looking into something that maybe had more of a document-based structure, because we were looking to kind of use it for a lot of article data. And had a couple different user touch points. So they were thinking about maybe using something GraphQL based. And they looked at a bunch of different options and thought GraphCMS had a great admin interface and was kind of easy to use. So then GraphCMS introduced them to us because we have experts like Bruno who know a lot about C# and .NET and Angular and GraphQL. So we we're going to help them in the transition over to GraphCMS.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering if you could actually give a little bit more insight there. And when you said that, now I'm going to transition to this next section here about requirements for the project itself. You said that they were looking for something more flexible. And from an old school developer perspective, Drupal often is one of the more flexible, but probably not the most approachable of the systems. What were some of the roadblocks they were running into with Drupal when it comes to flexibility, or why they decided to go for a hosted CMS instead? Yeah,
so I think on a high level, they were looking kind of to revamp the UI, and the system that they had been using was kind of old, and so it was all working pretty well, but there were some limitations that they had to like kind of work around using this like kind of older Drupal system. So they were kind of looking to something that could be that they could like allow for a lot of customization, and they had some other requirements too because it is an older system, like using integration with Woodwing and support for all of their old content that they were going to migrate over to. So I guess, Bruno, if you want to talk a little bit more about those limitations as you started the project.
Yeah, so some of the requirements that they had is that they had a lot of images that had to be supported by the new system they chose. So that was a really important point. And they also have like static pages that they have. So for example, the coronavirus right now, which is something that is like really new, we're able to put that online really quickly by just adding content on GraphCMS. And the synchronization, so basically they use a platform called Woodwing, where they produce content over there, and then they have the system sync with GraphCMS, updating the caching, because we have a lot of caching, so Woodwing has many integrations. Yep.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So with the, first of all, maybe we can even just rewind just a half step. So for the listeners, describe a little bit again the big picture of what BioCentury is, where are they delivering content to, what's the general flow or content structure that they're needing to support. That can be for either Melanie or Bruno.
So yeah, so BioCentury is kind of works in the biopharmaceutical industry. So they provide like research, like analysis, and like available data to their to people involved in the industry. So they have like both. They have a lot of different components to that. So they have, but one of the main things is articles that they have. They also have cool tools to analyze data available in the industry. We were kind of focusing on the article part for GraphCMS because it kind of made sense, and then also on their static content. So I think to rewind a little bit before that, they had more of this like monolithic API structure that would service all of these different components of their business, and all of these different these different parts like the user authentication, the emails, the articles, search, like all these different parts were kind of in this like very large system. So one piece that we thought might make sense to kind of start with was taking the articles and putting them into like another system that would be easier to work with. So to move them over to GraphCMS, and like it was pretty easy to get this API set up and migrate the content over, and then refactor the rest of the system also to kind of introduce more separation to these different components.
So they actually were then repurposing the content to multiple different contexts or delivery channels, if you will. So they have their traditional web page, static page, which I imagine had all kinds of paywall functionality involved there. Then you have emails that they were delivering. How many emails would you say they're generating or delivering? Because I think you touched on this before, that they actually have a rather intricate email system in place.
Yeah, so there's a couple, that was one of the things that they wanted to be able to do a little more easily, is they built out these editions for their emails, where they kind of like curate different content for their users and their different like daily editions and weekly editions and monthly editions. And they wanted for the admin to be able to more easily set these up and not have to interact with developers when they were doing it. And like you said, it is kind of the same content as would be, there's like articles that reference things on their webpage, but it's just like a different way of presenting that content to the user. And it was really pretty easy to create additional tools in there to, deliver content in this different way.
That's actually really fascinating, because I mean, in the headless space, it's kind of the story that we're often telling customers about, and here's a real cutting edge customer that's embracing this actual concept of reusing the same data structures to deliver emails as part of a product, creating very fast, responsive, static resources like a COVID-19 resource page. I mean, that's kind of the perfect case. And then they had search integration as well that you were describing. So obviously having to customize the index that you're trying to deliver to a service like that. I want to come back to some of these different services in the next section. The last thing I wanted to touch on, which is really fascinating, because I see this as sort of a trend with some of our customers. You were saying that they were synchronized with Woodwing, and so I did some research on that. And so Woodwing is basically this kind of a UI framework, or a content editing platform that's supposed to be sort of a glue between services. Can you maybe touch on that and how that works with GraphCMS?
Yeah.
There again. Sorry.
Take this one.
So give me what Woodwing is, Bruno. You can answer this. What's Woodwing, and how did that fit into the picture here?
Yeah, so Woodwing is a system, like you said, that can synchronize content across multiple different platforms, and they have been using this for a while now. And they have some other integrations besides GraphCMS. They have, when you post certain contents, it updates a cache in one of the APIs, so it knows to get the new updates. So there are some other integrations there, and they keep using this because they have been for a long time. So it's more, there's no really a good reason for them to, I guess, post directly on GraphCMS, because they already have the system and all the process to generate content and things like that.
Yes, I think it was nice that we have the flexibility of still using this system that people were comfortable with, and there were already all these other integrations set up in, and being able to integrate that with GraphCMS and then use all the additional features there is really useful.
And I would imagine that you were able to accomplish that through probably the mutation API, or how are you synchronizing that with GraphCMS?
Yes, so GraphCMS is basically an API which you can create, update, delete, and get information. So it's a perfect API to do all these operations, and it's really simple to just synchronize some content from one platform and then just do a mutation to save on GraphCMS.
I'm glad to hear that that's actually working out the way we intended to, because it's something we've seen where our customers, for example, like BioCentury, have a content team familiar with the tool, and there's no real reason to enforce or force a brand new learning context on the customer if they're familiar with something. If you can integrate that with a tool that gives you all of the quick wins and developer performance that GraphCMS provides. And I imagine as well, from what I understand about your company in particular, you sort of like this kind of intersection of enabling teams or people to accomplish more. So this was probably kind of a sweet spot for you guys when it came to how do you come alongside the customer and really help them enhance their output. Can you speak a little bit about sort of where that fits in for you guys as a company, or a concept for your company?
Yeah, so yeah, I think you're right. We like to work on products that increase human agency in a broad sense. So basically, we think technology should empower people to accomplish their objectives and do what they what they think is actually good for them. And so, yeah, so I think like a good example, GraphCMS's flexibility in allowing to integrate with systems that people were thought were serving them well already was great. I think also just in general, like GraphCMS, it was pretty easy to work with, and like I think allowed us to accomplish what we wanted to do and made it. The interface was pretty intuitive. There weren't a lot of surprises when we were working with it. It just like allowed us to do the things that we wanted to do and didn't, force us into anything else. So I think it was as a tool, we're really interested in tools that are like this, that empower people to accomplish things pretty easily. And I mean, even though as a developer, I am all into building out cool things from scratch, I think also it's great that there are solutions like this that require that allow people to do a lot of things without having to work with developers directly, and that allow them to allowing editors to kind of make changes that and understand them without having to know how to code is I think it's really cool.
Yeah, or at least certainly the developer can create sort of that enhancement tooling around a workflow, and then be able to step back and allow the tools to work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move on to the technical challenges you face, because when we had the initial sort of discovery call, you said something about the system was roughly 25 years old. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So like the company has been around since 1993. So the system is yeah. The system is pretty big. It has a lot of different business rules. There's a lot of complexity, and it changed a lot through time. So, even though it's a really big system and has all this complexity, complex stuff, today the system is kind of up to date. So they did a great job by updating the platform every time. And now we are using one of the latest framework Angular versions and one of the latest C# core versions. So it's pretty, in terms of platform, it's really up to date. The code has, of course, some issues because in the past, JavaScript didn't have all capabilities that they have today, or some things had to be different. Yeah, that's kind of the situation about the project overall.
And I imagine that probably will free you up as well, should you need to iterate from this point. So I'm guessing from my experience in some larger code projects that, and there was a point you'd even mentioned in the bullet points here, was that it was a fairly disorganized, maybe an unfair term, but these things grow organically, especially over 20 years, as people are figuring out how to really even embrace the web as a platform. So how was the process then of being able to use a centralized content repo to remove that kind of influence out of the code base and be able to organize the code that you're working with? How did that actually come about? Was that as smooth as you were hoping, or what were some learnings you had in that process?
Yeah, so I believe refactoring the application is something that's easy because GraphCMS is really simple. We don't have to worry about like implementing an API, implementing resolvers for GraphQL. We can just use something that's ready, and if we have to change something, we can just go there and drag and drop a new field on a model. So it's really simple to deal with GraphCMS and deal with all this API side. And so that's really easy to change the code that we have today. But one of the problems is that the code has a lot of business rules and a lot of different scenarios. And the hard part is to change things without breaking existing features. But in terms of like technically, like changing database calls, for example, that's really simple. It's really easy to use GraphCMS.
Sure, I can imagine that there are business rules upon business rules in an organization with that many different moving parts. How many databases were actually being used? It's something we see often. Is there's usually a lot of distributed different databases all around. How many different databases were actually in play? Do you
Yeah,
remember?
so
Or
yes, roughly. So like when AE joins the project, it was the API was a monolithic API. It had multiple different like pieces of logic on it, and then they decided to break this up. So now we have different we have like microservices. We have one service that is responsible to get articles and article information. There is a separate API now which deals with users. So regarding the databases, for the articles, I think all of or almost all of it is already on GraphCMS. So we don't use anything besides GraphCMS for the articles. But for users, we still depend on SQL Server and some other database. So overall, I would say that we have like a MySQL database, a SQL Server database, a Mongo database. We use some tools like Redis, Solr for caching. So we have like 5 or so databases or tools.
yeah, 5 now in the existing system. How many databases were in position just for the content portion before it got centralized on GraphCMS for the articles?
I think about this. Well, I guess we don't use MySQL anymore because I think the articles were in MySQL. So it's one less database, but we still depend on other databases for some different stuff like users and
Sure.
preferences.
And that's kind of one of the other powers about a headless, right? Is that you can integrate with pretty much any system. And if you want to just use it as just a content repo, you absolutely can. Or if you want to use it as an asset delivery mechanism, you absolutely can. And that's one of the benefits we see a lot of customers getting is they say, I don't have to do a massive migration to the next, large publishing platform. I can be more agile and adopt these newer technologies slower and with more meaningful, measurable results instead of saying we're going to do this multi-million-dollar investment for a 5-year migration, and then you can start measuring in 5 years. It's a nice way to be able to start going right away. So you're talking a little bit about the refactor. So the migration process, where was the migration process at when you came into the project? Were they already underway with the migration of their content? How much of the content model was already in place? What was your experience?
Yeah, so when we joined, there was already a lot of the content modeling and the migration was already done. I think basically there were thousands of articles that needed to be migrated and lots of images also. So the GraphCMS APIs are really useful for that. And being able to do these like mass migrations is kind of an essential part of that. So yeah, then when we joined, we mostly were, there was some stuff that was using GraphCMS already, and kind of the articles were migrated and the basic content structure is in place. And then we worked on more fully transitioning over to that system and making the articles live in GraphCMS. So like you're saying, like it was nice that instead of, it could be more of a gradual process because it was flexible. So we were helping to move over to make the like full transition over to GraphCMS for the articles.
Okay. And so how was that experience then for you as a development company to come in? So oftentimes the feeling when you come into a project for an agency come into a project and they say, the requirement is you need to use this specialist CMS that maybe you had or had not heard of at that point, but this new CMS, that's not always the recipe for happy thoughts in the agency. How was that for you when you came in and had a chance to, well, I mean, and we had a relationship with you ahead of time, like you'd done some projects using GraphCMS before. How was that when you were able to come into this one and see that they'd wanted to use GraphCMS for a project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. And David, who we work with at BioCentury, is a really smart, forward-thinking guy. So I think he made a lot of good decisions, and we were happy to, with working with GraphCMS, obviously. And yeah, I think it was pretty. We were pretty excited, and we had worked with GraphCMS on some things. And bringing Bruno into this project, he was like familiar with a lot of stuff from GraphCMS, but I think he was pretty happy that as the project evolved, also that things like worked as we would expect, because every project is a little different, and even with tools that you've worked with before, you can never know 100% exactly how it's going to progress in the project, but we were pretty confident that GraphCMS would be great, and then I think throughout the project, we were pretty happy with how it all worked out.
Great. So this is obviously then not the first rodeo you had with GraphCMS. What were, having had a chance to use it before, and then you came in again and had this really large microservice architecture, multi-client consuming project. What kind of best practices were you able to sort of pull out of this? You had sent me these 5 points here to reference. So they're thinking about modular organization, the use of stages, image pre-processing, cleaning the code, and organized layers. Maybe we can just spend a quick minute on each of those. What do you mean by thinking about the modular organization?
Yeah, so there are like general best practices. We always think about how we are going to create the models, because we want the models to be very well defined, and we don't have to do workarounds later or some weird things with it. We want to think before we do things, so we do the best way we can. And that is like related to organized layers, because we try to separate different pieces of the project in different places. So we have a place that deals with API calls, which is separate from the layer that does presentation. And that all relates to Clean Code, Clean Code is a book that was written by Robin Martin. And he talks about all of the best practices that many great developers that he interviewed said. So there are a lot of concepts, and we try to follow these concepts, like organizing stuff, modularizing stuff, organizing layers. And one of the sentences from this book is very interesting to me, and in general, it's very interesting. It says, even bad code can function, but if code isn't clean, it can bring a development organization to its knees. Every year, countless hours and significant resources are lost because poorly written code, but it doesn't have to be that way. So whenever we do things, we try to do thinking about first and then doing the best way we can to avoid frustrations in the future.
Yeah, that's great. I actually was not aware that this was a reference to the Clean Code book from Dr. Bob. Isn't that what he's called in the?
I think it's Uncle
at least
Bob.
On Stack Overflow, Uncle Bob. Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's definitely one worth reading if our listeners haven't looked into that before. What do you mean then with the image pre-processing? Because that one sounds a bit more concrete or tangible.
Yeah, so I think the stages and the image pre-processing are the ones that are kind of more specific to using GraphCMS. I mean, I think in general, it's nice that GraphCMS is flexible enough to allow us to use the other clean code stuff. But for the image preprocessing, we noticed there's, GraphCMS has great tools for preprocessing images, and then also, getting images that are the right size. For example, for the email editions, there's a lot of different email clients. So being able to use the image retrieval to get images that are the right size for all of that, it makes it a lot better rather than having to, build some workaround to get images that'll work in like 90 different clients. So I think it's a really powerful tool that's worth using. And then I think, can I talk about the stages a little bit for a sec?
Yeah.
So I think one of the other things that's a little different about the workflow from maybe a normal workflow is that now when you're developing, you'll have like your branches. So maybe you'll have like a development branch and like a staging or production, whatever. But now there's also stages, and I think it was useful to make those match up to stages in GraphCMS. So now, your GraphCMS is something that's creating the API. So you need to, and when you make changes there, you might need to make corresponding changes in your branches. And so I think keeping those in sync and remembering to merge both of them at the same time is just like a good practice to make the development workflow go a little more smoothly.
Oh, that's great. Let's come to the last section here, and that's the outcomes that you experienced. So these are the 5 points that you'd given me when asked about what your total overall outcomes were. That you had a straightforward product with no surprises, that there was some SEO improvements or opportunities anyways to embrace modern SEO best practices, the improving of user engagement, easier to work with a single source of truth, and don't have to write an API to manage data. Maybe you can give a couple of quick thoughts on each of those points.
Yeah, so GraphCMS was pretty easy to use in this project. We could easily just have data over there and just get it and work with it. It's pretty straightforward. If you go to the website and you look at the tutorial, you can learn really fast. And for the CEO, they already had systems in place where, so for the front end, they use Angular. And they have a system in place which renders Angular on the server side. So that allows the crawlers to get information earlier and not have the risk of not being able to render. And then when we switched the articles to GraphCMS, it was still really easy to keep doing. And we have data for Twitter, for example. If you post an article on Twitter, it should show the image and the description. And Melanie can talk about other topics.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think we talked about the number 3 a lot already. Basically, it was great to be able to use the same content for in different ways. So like the website, the emails, it was that was great to be able to repurpose the content. It was pretty important. And then it was easier to, I think, yeah, this is also kind of related to how there used to be a lot like this monolithic system with a lot of different databases related to many different things. It was easier for, once we separated the articles out, to have a single source of truth for that. And we didn't have to work with as many different databases, and we didn't have to work within a lot of different workarounds. It was easier to be able to change things once it was separated and know that you weren't going to break some other feature somewhere else. So that was really great. And then, yeah, I mean, it was also nice to not actually have to write the API ourselves. We don't need to implement the GraphQL server. And, just being able to drag and drop and, make little changes in the GraphCMS interface. We made it really easy. Yeah, we actually started using GraphCMS on our website too, because it was our company is growing on, and we have more and more content on our website now too. And so we had been just doing, hard coding a lot of stuff, but we wanted other people in our company who were not developers to be able to edit and manage content. And we decided that GraphCMS would be really easy to use with that, because it's, all of these outcomes, we wanted them as well.
That's great to hear. I mean, it's not something you hear every single day, that a agency goes into a customer, uses the CMS they've chosen for their massive re-architecture project, and they decide they like it so much they want to adopt it themselves. So that's really nice to hear from from our side, that you had that experience, that you wanted to bring it home, so to say.
Yeah, and obviously ours is a lot smaller, a lot simpler. So it's kind of nice also that this is something that can be used for such a complicated system, and also it's easy to spin up for something that's simple too. It's still worth using.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the key takeaway for, I mean, headless in general, but then I don't like to say, with GraphCMS in particular, but you really can just use it in pretty much every single situation you'd come across if you can flexibly define the content model or schema that you would want. That doesn't matter whether you're powering an agency site or a massive, biopharma publication suite. It's an amazing flexibility when you have the tooling that's available for developers today to leverage content when and where it makes sense for what they need.
Yeah.
I would say we can check real fast if there's any questions from the people that are listening today. This will be obviously recorded and distributed as well. So if there are questions in the future, you can always hit us up on Slack. But are there any questions in the audience today?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you guys so much. That was really interesting and really insightful for such a complex project to really get a deep dive on all of this information. So thank you guys first to our panelists. And we do actually have a couple of questions. So the first question would be, do you have any plans to expand into mobile channels? So like using GraphCMS for a mobile app with similar content?
I'm not sure, Bruno. Do you know if there are any plans for that?
Well, so BioCentury works on mobile. You can, if you load up the website on a mobile device, you can save the website on your home screen, and it kind of works like an app, and it uses GraphCMS just like the website. But I don't think they have any native projects for mobile right now. But I would totally use it in a project. I would totally use GraphCMS in a React Native project, for example.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I
I just want to ask you a question to Bruno. How are you fetching the content for the progressive web app? Is that what I imagine you're using there? Are you fetching GraphCMS from a service worker, or where are you rehydrating the application?
It's fetching from one of the APIs, because users don't have access to all articles. Only some users that buy the articles can have access. So to manage the access, we need this API to make this proxy call, so we don't expose the token, and we can cut articles to show only certain articles. So all the calls to the content is done through this API, and this API calls GraphCMS. So to populate data on the mobile application, it calls the API, and then it saves articles up to be, so you can read offline.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Melanie, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that I think one of the nice things about like GraphQL in general too is that it makes it easier to change the like to only get the data that you actually want for mobile, and maybe that's different than from web. So it makes it easier to not transfer too much data. So it's pretty nice. I think like that's probably one of the strong use cases for using a GraphQL based system is when you have like a mobile client and a website and all that stuff. I think that's probably like I think that was one of the reasons why Facebook designed it like that, because that was pretty important for them.
Great. Any other questions there, Emily? I'm just going to go to the actual proper questions slide here. Since we have one.
Yeah, so our last question for now, unless anyone wants to go ahead and write one in either the question or the chat bot, are going to be, do you know about how many content editors you guys were working with, the BioCentury team was working with?
Bruno,
You mean,
Like
how
the
many?
size? Yeah, like the size of the content team.
I don't know. But I assume it's a lot, a lot of people.
All right, well, so far we don't have any more questions, but if any more come in, feel free just to either DM us on Twitter at GraphCMS or write in our company Slack, and we'll be happy to
Hey,
get those answers for you.
sorry to cut you off, but I just got an answer from David. He's saying that they have 62 people generating content.
Perfect. Wow.
62. That's sizable. That's great. Yeah. So if there are no more questions, then I do want to again just say one more time, thank you so much for the time and for your glowing report about our CMS. We love to hear that. This was not paid promotion of any kind to be just ensuring that with the listeners, but we really do love hearing the feedback, love hearing that it was such a good experience for you. And if you do go today, to anybody who's listening now, this will be old news in the future, but and Bruno, if you go to our website today, you'll notice that things look rather different than they did this morning at 8 o'clock. We have a new website launched, and the next version of our application is in a soft launch phase. So definitely go check it out. A lot of new features there we're pretty excited about. So even more power coming.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I saw the news today and I'm really excited, especially with the performance improvements, which is crazy. It's crazy fast now.
That's great.
Thank
All
you
right,
guys so much.
Have a nice day and go out and use GraphCMS for all your projects. Bye.